Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Peninsula Facebook broadcast for today. I'm looking forward to speaking with all of you. As I said, welcome. We're going to cover some exciting news today. So, we will give some the opportunity to jump on. So, I guess we'll get a really live start at 12:05. So, give it a few minutes. Hello, Eddie. How are you? I'm very excited to speak to all of you today. We've had some massive movement in Ontario with regards to COVID-19, and I believe we will have some more movements with respects to British Columbia too, after the um, after the announcement they are making Wednesday afternoon today. So we will stay on top of that and keep you posted on what the outcome is from that. Very excited to see what they are saying. It seems that we are going in the up and up. We definitely are moving through the information as it comes through. I know you may have seen some changes come through with respects to COVID in stage two from our Ontario government. So we will go through some of the changes that they have spoken about today, that come into effect today, that they had made the announcement on Monday, and produced a lot of their publications online, which leaves us with us to, make sure that we are following. So very much looking forward to go over those changes with you today. Like I said, it's a very exciting time to hop on and talk about next steps with each other. Before we get into the webinar today, while we're waiting for others to join, I will give you a background just about myself, a little bit about Peninsula. This conversation is definitely it's a good platform for you guys to ask questions that you may have. I assume that you are going to have quite a few questions coming through just because of where the provinces are at right now, and I will do my best to help you navigate through those questions today. And if we don't have the answer, please just make sure that you reach out to one of the moderators or myself after this session, and we can link you in with one of our experts on our team, whether it be a consultant or advisor, to help you navigate through the next steps with COVID-19. So, Peninsula itself is an HR, human resource, and health and safety consulting company. It started off in the UK. We are also in Australia, and just more recently, we have started up in Canada starting in 2017. Worldwide, we have 80,000 clients, and in Canada, just starting in 2017 alone, we already have upwards in excess of 4,000 clients. So the main purpose for Peninsula is to make sure that, we're here to act as your security blanket and to walk you through, difficult situations, and having proper procedures and plans in place with respects to COVID and HR. Once COVID does kind of pass on, there's going to be other issues that come up. So we're here to really be your guide on the side, let you manage your business the way that you need to manage it. While we focus on the background, the regulations that you need to have in place with regards to HR and HSC. As for myself, uh, good afternoon. My name is Hope McManus. I am the head of health and safety for Peninsula Canada. I have been the head of health and safety for Peninsula Canada for approximately 3 months now. Prior to that, I had the amazing opportunity to work as a health and safety professional for the majority of my career, working for a global air carrier, some of you may know, called Air Canada. And I was able to really understand not only from the front lines how safety works in an operation, but from a senior level as well, and how we talk about implementing changes and communication. In addition to my experience working as a health and safety professional for a global air carrier, I was able to work for an engineering consulting firm called WSP, which allowed me to work with a lot of clients, understanding their needs, working to see how we can, respectfully cater to them and treat them as, very individual people. We know that no business is the same. That's why it's important to make sure that the plans that you have built really follow, the specific need of what your business needs. So, without further ado, let's get started. Let's talk about what's going on with COVID right now. We had some very exciting announcements, like I said, from Ontario on Monday, where Ontario specifically with Toronto and Peel, were able to move into the second stage. Now we know a lot of Ontario has started to move into other into stage two, which has been exciting. However, the crux is we have been waiting on a lot of businesses who are heavily dispersed within the Peel and Ontario region. So, with respects to that, there have been minor changes to what the government has put out with respects to who can open and who cannot. It seems that a lot of the businesses that are working within close proximity of the face, whether you're talking about salons, aesthetics, etc., that has still been prohibited right now. However, in the next coming weeks, depending on the case decline or incline, that may be revisited. So we are seeing that we are making great progress as a province in Ontario. Ontario seems to be taking a little bit more of a conservative approach. So it seems to be they're taking a little bit more time, opposed to other provinces that are going through the COVID recovery phase. When we're talking about British Columbia specifically, we know that British Columbia has been in stage two for almost over a month, which is a good amount of time. Typically, the World Health Organization wants to do an assessment um, after they've implemented a stage, and that assessment time typically goes from 2 to 4 weeks. If the provinces are successful, then they'll talk about moving into the next phase. Like I said, dependent on what BC's government says today, they do have an announcement coming in Wednesday afternoon, which may talk about phase three. And it's really important for you to understand as a business, Ontario stages are different from BC and Alberta. So, for example, if you want to talk about one of the differences when you're talking about BC stage two, you'll see that office work sites are included as part of their stage two reopening. Whereas when you're talking about Ontario, their changes were made that verbiage was actually eliminated. So it's very important to stay current and up to date. With respects to Alberta, removed their emergency act a couple weeks ago, which is great news. So they should be likely progressing into stage three relatively soon. And as for Ontario, I do suspect, again, dependent on the case decline or increase, that we would end up moving into stage three, within the 2 to 4 weeks based on, positive numbers, like I said. So it's taking time. You want to make sure that you're taking the time to get ready. Like I said, some of you may be open, which is fantastic. We are so excited to see you guys open again. It's a really positive time. So we're gonna take the time to get this under control. And for those of you who are not open yet, you're gonna get there soon. So let's talk about some of the things that are coming up today. I've given you a little bit of a heads up of where the government's at. So I do see some questions coming in, which is great. So I'm going to start off with the first question and we can navigate from there. If you do have a question as we go throughout this live session today, please just type it in the comment box and I'll address it the best I can. And if it's something we need to take away, our moderators will take that away and get an answer for you as soon as possible. So the first question I have comes from Gemma Foster. Gemma Foster says, can I actually get shut down if someone comes to inspect? So I'll give you guys a little bit of background of what's going on with, especially with respects to Ontario. Ministry of Labour has hired around approximately 500 inspectors to carry out inspections. What their goal is at the end of the day is to take a little bit of a step back with respects to COVID. They're going into workplaces and looking to ensure that we all businesses have the appropriate measures in place. We are actually already having clients be inspected by the MOL. So a really positive news story, just before we get into that answer, Gemma, is we just got feedback. I just got feedback before the session, actually, that we had one of our clients who went through an MOL inspection, and the measures that we had provided to the client with respects to our return to work guide, et cetera, were implemented, and the MOL inspector was essentially, quote, blown out of the water, end quote. So that's really positive news. That's how we can get you sorted with that. So just essentially to go back to the question that you did have, Gemma, can you get shut down? Yes, it is a possibility to get shut down. However, like I said, MOL is taking a little bit more of a conservative approach and not really slapping on the orders, unless they see that there's an absolute necessity to do that. With that being said, there was about 22 job sites that were shut down the last time that we did check our information. 10,000 inspections were done and 5,500 businesses did receive orders. An order is essentially the MOL telling you that you have to fix the gap in your workplace. So you may not have social distancing that you're respecting enough. You may not have the proper safe work procedure in place to make sure that you're following the guidelines that are set out by the government. Essentially, what the guidelines are that are set out by the government are make sure that you're practicing social distancing, make sure that you have good hygiene procedures. The best way to try to stop COVID right now is through prevention. So it's social distancing. And it doesn't just stop there, it's really taking a second to look at your entire business and seeing from not only the staff aspect, but the client aspect, how you're going to implement those measures. So it's not only creating a safe work procedure, it's also communicating that safe work procedure. A lot of refusals that we do see come through, and I'm sure that is probably going to come up as a question, are because we're not really effectively communicating to our staff as, as a business on the measures that we've taken into account. So just make sure that when you are setting up your workplace, or as you are right now opening your workplace up today, which is fantastic. Congratulations. We're so happy to see you back online. Um, Take that into account. Make sure that you've covered the bases. We do have quite a few tools that we've put a lot into just to make sure that our small, medium-sized businesses are prepared for this. We want to make sure that you know you have that you have that excellence factor to health and safety. You're not just there to meet the standard. We want to make sure that we're meeting and exceeding because we want you to be your industry leader. So I have another question that comes through from Paulette West. Hi, Paulette. We are in the process of making sure our employees have their vacation days booked until the end of 2020. Can we ask them to track their travel just in the interest of protecting our staff and customers when people return from vacation? That's a great question, Paulette. So what I'm going to talk about right now is the importance of contact tracing. At this time, we also, in previous to COVID, it was always a very interesting line between HR and health and safety. Now, because we're in this massive field of health and safety where COVID is this, highly transmissible infectious disease, we're finding that a lot of the safety measures that are being taken and put into place are trumping a lot of the other HR stuff that's coming up. So if, as the employer, you are putting this process into account in order to protect your staff and your clients, that's a practice that would be deemed as acceptable. And the reason being is that you really need to do tracking. In addition to that, when we are talking about the government guidelines and what they are mandating, there are some countries that will ask you to self-isolate, right? And we have to make sure that that's being followed. And really, it comes down to, you putting that practice into place to protect, like you said, your staff and your clients coming in and in and out of the workplace. A really good thing to do is, the Public Health Agency of Canada and the local public health units, whenever there is a positive case, it's a means of contact tracing, right? So if you're really able to have a good process in place to have contact tracing in place and say, yeah, this person went to X and X, you're able to do the backtracking a lot more easier, and it's more effective because we find that when you're not contact tracing, it's very, very hard to go back and try to remember where this person was or what this person was doing. So getting on the proactive side, Paulette, sounds like it's a very proactive measure. I think that's a good example. This is more of an HR question too, the other part that I'm going to answer. So I would encourage you to reach out to us after that. But, there are certain cases where in different provinces, they do mandate the 14-day isolation. So if you are going to let that person go away, it becomes a question of are you going to pay them or not for that 14 days that they are mandated to isolate by the government. So that's just something that may come up as an HR portion for you. I'd be a little bit limited to answer that part for you, but again, like I said, we can link you in if you give us a call after, and we can help you cover that because I sense and what I had seen before in my previous lives and experiences throughout my career, especially in the midst of COVID. We're talking about flight attendants at Air Canada here. Um, it's you have to find out how to tread that line, and it's first of all finding out if you're federally regulated, if you're provincially regulated, and then going from there and following the mandate. So take that away as another consideration, Paulette. That may be something you want to look at when you are asking about travel and et cetera. And if you are permitting them to go away, and you are tracking it, how do you want to handle that post isolation factor if it comes into consideration? Because I can guarantee you it's 100% going to come up at least once in your workplace. Lulu, I got a question from Lulu. What if there is a COVID positive person at my work? It's inevitable. It's going to happen to one of our businesses. Okay. So, what you need to do is make sure that you have a plan in place. Having a plan in place really is going to outline the procedures that you are going to take as a workplace to make sure that if something happens, you can react. You have a proactive plan so you can react according to the proper procedures that you want to do. And some of the way that you want to build your procedures are, the following. Like I said, how is your contact tracing plan? Have you considered that? Have you looked at different ways that you are going to figure out where this person was, or if they had a meeting, who did they have a meeting with? So how are you essentially going to go back and track their steps? And how are you going to know where they are so you can disinfect the areas? Really, what you should be doing is you should be making sure that that person is contacting public health, because businesses need to make sure that they have public health guidance on how to either shut down their workplace or tell employees to monitor themselves. And you can't really make a hard call on, a blanket case on that. You really have to go with what public health says. Public health only asks those to isolate who have been in close proximity for an extended period of time. If they haven't, they may just essentially be asked to self-monitor. So, those are some things that you need to consider. We have that in our return to work guide as well. Not to plug it too much, but it's very exciting because we are reaping, we find that our clients are seeing really good benefits from that, especially from inspectors that are coming in. So it's a good option for you guys to have, but just make sure you take those types of things into consideration. And if you are having them come back to work eventually, it would be highly advisable to make sure that they have a medical clearance certificate before entering the workplace. But you also have to heed caution that if there is a positive case, I cannot urge you enough. Please don't share the name. That's a privacy issue. And in addition to that, the medical clearance that you are receiving from a doctor is not necessarily going to say a lot of the medical information. The information you may just get is they're good to come back to work. So as long as a doctor is saying that someone is good to get back to work, you really have to trust the fact that that doctor has, went over, assessed them, and has given them the clearance. So there's just a couple good things that you want to take away. So I have a question from Justine. Hi, Justine. Is there a list of what you can be fined for in terms of safety measures you're legally required to put in place? There's so much information out there, can't seem to distill it down to what is legally required in terms of PPE. Like if you can't be 6 feet apart, what do you have to have in place instead? It's a good question, Justine. So let's take some time to go through it. So like I said earlier, MOL is really taking a different approach right now, which works for you. They're coming in and helping businesses the most that they can. There's this fine line to which they're going to have to draw the line and essentially give you an order if you're not following through with it. But they're really trying to work as best as you can. So you can be fined if there's a blatant disregard. So if there is, inspectors really go on, the effort of measures that you as an employer are trying to put in place. So if they see that you're trying to put measures in place, and let's say it's a non-compliance from one of your staff, that could be something that they're a little bit more lenient on. But you can absolutely get fined if there's a blatant negligence to put certain measures in place. So if the government has told you to put social distancing in place and you don't, to where you're able to do, then yes, absolutely, you can get fined. But let's go to the next step and the next question after that. So let's say, Justine, you're in a business where you can't necessarily respect social distancing. It's a hair salon, it's a dentist office, etc., and beyond. We know that we're going to infringe on social distancing. So what you need to do is you need to, under the Occupational Act, the employer has the obligation to make sure that their workplace is as safe as reasonably practical. We know that in the world of safety, you will not always be able to eliminate a hazard. So we, in the world of safety, create a plan that's called the hierarchy of controls. And I'm going to stay away from a lot of the technological things. So just in blatant terms, Hierarchy of control, best course of actions is eliminating the hazard. We as a society cannot eliminate COVID right now. Although historically we've never moved faster to creating a vaccination, we are creating plants that have not only, we're building plants that not only are getting ready to manufacture, but we're doing it simultaneously within the testing phase. However, that being said, we're still not able to eliminate it. So let's go to the next best thing. Okay, engineering controls. So that is what you want to think about in your business. When I talk about engineering controls, it's things to make sure that we're protecting and trying to respect the social distancing aspect. So let's say you work at a business where you can install plexiglass barriers, a barrier to essentially stop that spread of any droplets that may carry on within the 2 meter distance. The 2 meter distance was taken into consideration and promoted by the World Health Organization because that was the approximate amount that a droplet would travel before landing on someone. That's why they talked about having the 2 meter distancing aspect come into play. So if you can't do that, you want to look at other things, and it's either engineering controls that talk about plexiglass. Um, it's a combination of safe work procedures, so teaching your employees to work safely and saying, let's say again for a dentist office, you are using automatic equipment. Is there other equipment you can use instead that's going to generate less airborne particles? So it's another means of, an engineering control and changing the way that people are working to try to limit the amount of airborne particles that are going into it. In addition to doing that, Justine, you also want to look at, like I said, safe work procedures, teaching people, but PPE. So PPE, a lot of people all over the news talk about personal protective equipment, but it's actually the last resort for safety for professionals. We talk about masks all the time, we talk about gloves all the time when COVID started, but masks and gloves should never be used on by itself. It should always be married with a safe work procedure. So you've got to teach the employees how to work safely and how to social distance where it's possible, and it should be coupled with engineering controls in place. So let's say, when you're looking at PPE, you want to talk about, if it's necessary, they can wear a mask. But remember, masks are to be used as an added layer of protection where social distancing may be infringed upon. So if you are able to respect the social distancing, that's great. A lot of businesses are electing to utilize masks. We know that the information on masks changes on a weekly basis. We see debates among public health professionals, doctors, everyone going back and forth, but the general consensus now is that it's an added layer of protection, and that's what Dr. Teresa Tam had stated, I believe, a few weeks ago. So it's masks, it's face shields. You really have to look at the job that your employees are doing and then find the appropriate PPE, because we have gowns that are coming out. We have hand sanitizer that to promote good hand hygiene. We have, like I said, masks again, face shields. It's really dependent on the hazard that the employee is exposed to. And that's something that we work through with our clients, just to say, okay, let me see the actual job that they're doing. Okay, this is what we're going to recommend that they use to make sure that if we cannot respect social distancing, that you have controlled the risk in your workplace to something which is defined as low as reasonably possible. So you cannot eliminate it, but we cannot avoid infringing on social distancing, but you've made that risk very, very low. So that's one thing that you can that's a couple options that you can do. I know it's a long answer, Justine. There's a lot that goes into it. That's why it's a long-winded answer. But essentially, that's kind of the method that you want to take into account when you are opening your business and going throughout the changes that you're experiencing. It's definitely a new way of thinking, and it's also a time for everyone to be creative with their business. It's looking at waiting rooms. Do we need to have waiting rooms available? And if we do, how do we minimize the amount of people in a waiting room or the amount of people waiting at the front of the store, to go to their appointment, et cetera, and so on. It's about even talking about using technology to help plan appointments better with your staff, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of stuff that you want to take into consideration. And if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out, Justine. No problem. Thanks. So, those are things that you want to take into consideration. But like I said, reach out to me and my team if you have any other questions. So I have a good question coming in from Nikki. Hello, Nikki. So is temperature checks mandatory? Our head office is in BC, but operating throughout Canada, should we provide all of our offices with thermometers? I love the temperature theory controversy right now. So, this is what I would recommend. If you're going to use temperature checks, first of all, they're not mandatory. Long story, very short, direct answer. They're not mandatory right now. However, if you do elect to use them right now, what I would say is don't just rely on temperature checks. The reason being, and it's explained in our plan as well, is that COVID sometimes has an absence of symptoms. So we talk about asymptomatic individuals. You know, with the recent information that has come out from the World Health Organization, they do say that the amount of asymptomatic individuals driving the numbers up for COVID are relatively low. So that's kind of reassuring for us. However, you don't know if a person has taken Tylenol before coming into work, which may take away and create an absence of fever for them. You're not aware if, there's some symptoms that may be popping up when others are not. So what I would say to you is if you are going to put a temperature check in place, that's all right. It's not that you shouldn't do it. It's just that it shouldn't be the only measure that you're putting into place. Get ahead of it and look at having a health screening questionnaire, whether it's for your clients or your staff. Look at having that and putting that into place. So we have created a client questionnaire, client, patient, customer questionnaire that we provide to our clients ourselves for them to use at their businesses to hand out and to have anyone coming into their facility fill it out beforehand. In addition to that, we also have an employee one as well. It's always good to look at different avenues as to assess someone's health. It's just important that if you are implementing these measures, what you want to also do is just be careful with how you store that information, right? So that information is going to be employees' personal information. So just be very careful about, how you're sharing it, how you are storing it. Make sure it's in a controlled area, preferably with a lock, filing cabinet, locked door, etc. So when an inspector comes in, they're able to say, okay, yes, you've got those files in a controlled area, and you can assure that your staff that you are taking that into account. So long story short, it's okay that you're doing the temperature checks. Just have maybe a questionnaire as well. The questionnaire is going to address other things: cough, weakness, difficulty breathing. Have they been in contact with anyone else who has displayed any of the symptoms or anyone else who has COVID? So that is, as an employer, that's probably the most effective method you are going to be able to do as of right now. Keep in mind, I read a very interesting article this morning with respects to COVID and testing. British Columbia is also looking at wastewater to do testing. So we will see what comes out of that. But right now, we are looking to see that there are many different methods of testing that the World Health Organization, Center of Disease Control, infection specialists are coming up with. So do with, use the tools that you have right now, use the tools that we can provide to you as well. Even if it's having those forms electronically, having your staff fill it out beforehand, utilize the different resources. I do suspect that we really are going to get to a point as a nation, globally as well, that we're going to find different means of way of testing for COVID-19. But until then, we've really got to work with, a lot of the information that we have. So that would be, Nikki, in my opinion, that would be best case scenario if you had a temperature check, but coupled with a questionnaire to fill out. I would 100% recommend that. So, feel free, like I said, to reach out to us if you do need a copy of that. We can 100% provide that to you. And there's also other things you want to take a look at when you are talking about your workplace, right? We talk about temperature checks, but we also want to make sure that we are considering the amount of people coming in and out of our office space or work area. So it's a really good idea to make sure that you have a contract or a visitor guide as well. And that will help make sure that you have contact tracing, that you have a plan, that you tell, contractors or visitors that are coming in to not enter, or to make sure that they're agreeing to follow safe work procedures. So I've got a question from Christina. Hi, Christina. What should I do if an employee feels sick? So you should essentially, Christina, have a COVID positive preparedness case in your workplace. So essentially, what you want to do is get ahead of it, have a plan created first, and then make sure that plan is clearly communicated so staff are aware um, staff are aware essentially on what the next steps are to take. But what I would do is that if an employee comes to you and is sick, I would encourage them to leave the premise. World Health Organization, CDC, is recommending anyone with flu-like symptoms to return home and stay at home. Further to that, what I would recommend is that they also contact their doctor or public health unit. So you may see as we go through COVID right now, there's a lot of doctors that are doing teleconsulting, which is fantastic. This was this was a little bit promoted before COVID, how we did see that there were some medical clinics really coming up right now. And, for instance, Apple Tree, maple.com is a great app to use too. Although just a warning, there is a cost associated to that. But there are a lot of places that are able to do um, teleconsult. So instead of having your staff member go to the doctor, encourage them to use the means of teleconsultation. If you are in Ontario, you could just give them your health card number and they're able to do it virtually, which is a great time saver. It allows more doctors to see more patients and, absent from the fact that they may be able to do certain tests, if the doctor does an assessment online and they feel that the testing is not sufficient, then what they're going to have to do is ask the employee to go in. So it's kind of a first means, but it's very effective. And the doctor may also say, we really want you to go talk to public health, and then public health will make their assessment. It's very important that during this time you keep contact with the employee because you want to make sure that if that employee does come back as COVID positive, the proper measures to take. However, that being said, public health may end up contacting you first because the first thing that public health is going to do when they have not even employee, but a member person have it, have a positive case is they perform contact tracing and they say, okay, where do you work? Who have you been in close contact with? And typically, what public health actually does is if they believe anyone may be considered to be at risk, which is again, prolonged exposure for prolonged close contact, then they will reach out to the individuals personally. And then once they reach out to the individuals, they will actually conduct an assessment and then give them the steps that they need to take. Hey, how are you doing? Are you feeling well? Do you feel any symptoms? No. Okay, just self-monitor. Or yes, no, we need you to self-isolate. What's the difference between, self-isolation versus self-monitor and public health definition? Essentially, when you're talking about self-monitor, it means just watch yourself for symptoms in layman's terms. Watch yourself, take your temperature for twice a day, see if you're developing a cough, see if you're having respiratory issues. From what we know about the virus, and this is the first strand of the virus that was newly discovered in, the end of 2019, is essentially it's a respiratory virus. So with that being said, it attacks the lungs, and this is why doctors do an assessment trying to determine essentially, if they're having breathing problems, if they're coughing a lot, etc. So those are the things that public health is probably going to typically aim their questions to, and then they'll go from there. As an employer, what you really need to do is just make sure that once you've got the advice from public health, you follow it. Right? So if it means telling your employees to self-monitor, you've got to tell them to self-monitor, check their temperature, like I said, check for coughing, et cetera, et cetera. Those are certain things that you want to take into consideration, right? Um, so that's what I would recommend, Christina, if there was an employee that said they were sick in the workplace. Those are the steps I would take into account, but always, always involve and go off public health too, because they are trained doctors, they're medical professionals. Those are the people we need to stay close to right now because they're tracking the virus, they're working off the latest updates as well on a scientific evidence, and they're the ones that are actually allowing and telling us what the measures are that we need to take into consideration. So, hi Justine. So, is there a limit of the number of people you can have in your space per square footage? Now I have to go back to this because I swear with all the reading that I've done, I did see that there was a number. However, the number does currently evade me. But what I would say is I would take a look at your workspace and I would see how many people can you adequately social distance in there, and have the safe, have the safe measures in there. We know that there was a lot of communication that came out, especially by Ford, saying that the limits of social gathering have been relaxed. You can go from 5 to 10, but you need to take into consideration that social versus work are two different things. You know, from a work standpoint, you are there to be able to put the proper measures in place. From a social standpoint, doesn't necessarily, there's no obligation to really have those measures in place, nor are there inspections being conducted to make sure that the social circles are being respected. So what I would say is take a look at your workplace and say, um, how many people can I respectfully, how many people can I allow into this place of business that are going to be able to respect that social distancing aspect? Um, and like I said, I will have to I will have to take a part of that question back because there were, and it may have been a BC thing, but I will kind of take that back and see where exactly that did come up. I know it's really hard to also put a number on that because the number is typically derived from essentially taking a look at a square footage, saying if you had I think it was one person per 10 square meters. That's the number that I was looking at. So you're giving that person more than enough space to practice social distancing. So those are things you want to take into consideration when you are really planning for your workplace. So I think that's the number Justine I was trying to remember is the one person per 10 square meters. Those are just the those would just be the Canadian, standards that typically it seems that all provinces are starting to adopt at this point. So Christina, hello. Christina has a question. So do employers have a right to inquire when a staff presents a doctor's note for medical leave? So it's a good question. I would just wonder if that is just in respects to just, I think more, maybe a little bit more clarity on that, Christina. So do employers have a right to inquire when a staff presents a doctor's note for medical leave? So I'm going to answer just based on how I understand it, but if you want to clarify, clarify if I'm kind of going off another end and that's not the answer that you're looking for. So if your employee, let's say you're a staff employee saying I can't come to work because it's unsafe for me to be in this space, so I need to be accommodated. As an employer, if you are, as an employer, there's something called the duty to accommodate. So it's under the Canadian Human Rights Commission. So we have to go through a process as employers as accommodating an employee as reasonably as possible to the point of undue hardship for an organization. So if an employee shows up to you, says, I can't come to work, here is my note. Um, you can always look at that note and make sure that and there's something that's called an independent medical assessment that employers can also seek out if they have questions about the validity of the note. We know that there tends to be okay, great, Christina, thanks. Okay. So it is kind of what I'm thinking. So as a form of accommodation. So essentially, I'll start with saying, so employees coming to you saying they need an accommodation, they give you a note. The note is very bare bones. So you don't have a lot to work with. What you need to make sure that you have is you need to make sure that you have that employee take an FAF, which is a functional abilities form. They take that to the doctor, and that FAF is a form that the doctor is going to fill out that specifically outlines the restrictions on what they can and can't do. You can't just have a medical note from someone saying, I have to work from home. It doesn't work like that. It has to say, what are the specific restrictions with respects to sitting, standing, mental health, the limitations of shift hours. What the FAF is, which again is a functional abilities form, it's more of a roadmap for the employer to work on to say, how you're going to set up the shifts, how many days they're going to work, if they can't stand for too long, if they can't sit for too long. So that is what you need to make sure that you obtain from a doctor. And with the FAF, um, there's no continuous, it's as good forever and ever and ever. No, doctors will always need to make a reassessment. And the reassessment de- is determined based on the disability that the individual is presenting. So if the individual is presenting something saying, whether it's a physical or mental, it may be you may have an FAF that is obtained every 2 weeks. So at the bottom of the FAF form, what you are going to see is X employee is able to work in a limited capacity. Next reassessment date, you know, um, July 24th. So as that date comes up, Christina, you just need to be cognizant of that because when that date comes up, that employee needs to go back to the doctor and get another FAF because we know that medical conditions may change, right? If the medical condition changes, the FAF, the functional abilities form, will change, and you need to work with that. If the FAF change, it just depends on how the employee is responding to treatment. If they're not responding well, it may be a regression in what it says in the FAF. Say they were working 4 shifts before a week, they can only work 2 shifts before. Now, the second half of that question, Christina, what you want to take into consideration is if you have questions as an employer from an FAF that is supplied. So you are within your rights as an employer, and this gets a little bit murky. So what I would say is I would definitely reach out to us regarding the specifics of the situation because you have to look at the time frame that you're working with this employee for, how flexible you need to be, how long they're taking to get that documentation, and et cetera, and so on and so on. So if you believe that there is suspicion about the validity of the restrictions that are filled out by the doctor on the FAF, let's say it's their personal doctor, et cetera, you are within your rights because you are accommodating as an employer to seek out what's called an independent medical assessment. So an independent medical assessment is something along the lines is that it is an unbiased party coming in to do a medical assessment. So that's something that you can explore too. It really depends on a case by case basis. So you really have to look at it, determine if as an employer, are you satisfied with that? If you are not, then yes, I would seek the independent medical assessment route. It has come up a lot with our clients lately, especially with COVID. So we try to help them navigate through that and just make sure that while you are going through this process, whatever process you're going through with them, it's always good as an employer to document. Document the conversations you're having with the employee. Document the date, the time that you spoke with them. If you can get a paper trail, please have the paper trail. And the reason being is not really more so you know, um, it's not necessarily meant to have a negative connotation. It's really meant to back yourself up because many times if this goes to a tribunal, you have the information to go back on. And you can say, on May 8th, I sent this email and we didn't hear back from the employee until June 4th. And in those cases, when you're dealing with, disability management, et cetera, those are the things that essentially can help you as an employer. You know, work work to have this a favorable outcome if something does arise. So just like last thing I would say onto that, Christina, is just document, document, document. Even if you think it's a little conversation from personal experience too, just document always. So question from Justine. This is specific, but we are a music school. Someone told me you are not currently allowed to sing indoors. Is this true? It makes sense, but just wondering if you could be fined for this. That's a very interesting question. What I would say, Justine, is uh, that is not something that I have heard before. I haven't heard that as a restriction in phase 2, and I'm not sure where you're located, but that's something that I would look at. What I would say is give a call to our advice line after and see if there's anything specific because I haven't heard of that. I don't think that is a thing, to be honest with you. I just think that if you are going to have those, if you are going to open up the doors, we actually had a webinar yesterday, and a client was providing music lessons indoors. And, the same thing that we had said to him is just make sure that you have the proper controls in place, which are the ones that we had mentioned before. If you are having someone sing, just make sure that you are doing the social distancing aspect too. But that's something, like I said, reach out to our advice line. We have really good advisors that are able to walk through the specifics of that. But just personally, I haven't seen that come saying that people can't. Oh, is you? Hi again. Yeah, I wouldn't see that. I wouldn't say that that would be an issue, but what I would say, to revert back to the earlier point, is definitely, you know, like utilize the plexiglass. And it's difficult. It's difficult to, part of it is difficult to say just because it's really good to have an idea of the workspace that you're looking at. And that's typically, when we have our advisors or consultants to conduct a virtual walkthrough, it kind of helps us paint the bigger picture to say, okay, how much space do you have in your area? And what are you dealing with here? And, so that's how I would try to navigate through that. But I can definitely appreciate the challenge. I can hear, I see that, I see why someone would raise concern for that. However, even if you do look at the specifics for stage two, I don't think that they've went, deep into the realms of someone singing inside. So, like I said, if you want to stay on the err on the side of caution, which I would always recommend. I take more of a conservative approach as a safety professional. I think our brains are trained to, try to get the risk to as low as reasonably possible. And look, it's your business too, right? When you have clients coming in, I think we talk about reputation. So whether it's, our reputation about how people hear from each other, I think, to be honest with you, and we probably all go through this too. We enter these work areas where we immediately feel safer going into one space that has clearly identified the measures that they're taking opposed to others. I can get on a personal level with all of you right now. And, when my husband and I go grocery shopping, there are certain grocery stores that take more enhanced measures that are clearly communicated to customers versus other places. And as a consumer myself, I and we elect to, really go towards the safer approach. And, even to take out the biasness of being a safety professional, my husband made that decision, really on his own to say, you know what? I'd rather go to a place where I know that either, I'm being briefed every time I'm walking in the store. I can see that, questionnaires are being filled out. I can see that there's disinfection happening, that there's temperature checks happening, coupled with other procedures in place and more. So that's really what I would recommend in cases like that. I know, you know what, everyone, I know that it's definitely an overwhelming thing to deal with. And I want to reassure you, I think we should take a moment to just talk about the difficulty that you've all navigated through. It was a very uncertain time. We didn't know when we were coming back up to operate again. It's a scary time when this is something that you've put so much effort and heart and soul into. That's why our goal and, part of the reason why I elected to work with Peninsula was to help, you know, the small and medium-sized businesses, which are essentially the backbone of our economy. And that's a fact, right? Small, medium-sized businesses make up the majority of our economy. We have to make sure that they're taken care of. So that's why it's really important that we work to support you, and help you navigate through these unprecedented times. We're all globally learning through this together. We know that COVID-19 doesn't discriminate against anyone. This is a virus that, we talk about it, going out in Italy and potentially mutating into something else, and which is why it was potentially more severe in Italy versus when we're talking about areas in Asia like Beijing. So it's very important just to make sure that um, you can have those lines of communication open. Even with our advice line, we have dealt with work refusals that come in after hours. We are operationally available at all times. And I can personally say after hours, if there is an escalation, it just comes right to me anyways. It's just there to help and to recognize that, our clients are not necessarily always working 9 to 5. They're working all types of different hours. So you need that support. And that's what we're here to help you do too, right? So, a question from Gemma. Hi, Gemma. Can an employee refuse to come to work? Yes, they can refuse to come to work. However, will it be upheld is the better question, I think. So, Employees are given their rights. So three rights that an employee has is the right to participate, the right to know, and the right to refuse. Right to participate essentially means they have to participate. They have the right to participate in the Joint Health and Safety Committee. They have a right to participate in health and safety related matters, making sure that they're part of the solution. So that's about the right to participate. The right to know is, again, this is something that, of course, it's 100% fair. They have the right to know what's going on. So you have to build trust and make sure that you keep the lines of communication. It's very, very important when you're talking about employee culture. The last part is they have the right to refuse. Any employee has the right to refuse unsafe work if they feel that the task that they're being asked to do puts them in a situation that may cause harm to themselves or someone else around them. Important notation that this may exclude some people in the healthcare profession, and that's a conversation for another day. But nonetheless, it's a disclaimer for you to take away. And I do not make the rules. I am just the messenger for the government for the regulations that come into place. So when we're talking more in a general sense of the right to refuse dangerous work, yes, but again, there has to be an accountability in part on the employee that they can clearly tell you what task they're doing that is going to cause them to come into imminent danger, imminent threat. And typically we're talking about COVID right now, so their threat or their concern is going to be with respects to COVID. So what you need to make sure is you need to make sure that when you are building your return to work plan, that you have your employees' input too, because having employees feel like they're part of the solution is going to make them feel more comfortable. Let's face it, we're not on the front lines every day, so we may not see every single hazard that our employees are exposed to. So that's why it's very important to say, what do you on a regular basis see that you are being exposed to? And that's where you want to make sure that, you take the hazards, you do a risk assessment. So in layman's terms, you reduce that risk to as low as you can. It's not going to be eliminating it altogether. It's just going to be getting it to as low as you possibly can in a practical manner. The government does recognize that we still have to tread that line between operating and, operating as safe as we possibly can. So if they can clearly identify the task that's hazardous, you and the employee need to work together to find a solution, or the direct supervisor that's on shift. If you can't, dependent on the size of your company, you may need to bring in a health and safety rep, joint health and safety committee, or if you're federally regulated, you need to bring in the workplace committee. So that will be a joint effort by everyone. And everyone needs to take their employer hat off. They need to take their joint health and safety committee hat off. They need to work together as a team to resolve this, and to get the employee back to work and make sure that they feel safe when they're back in their course of work. The last resort is that if you work as a committee, if you work with your health and safety rep and there's still no resolution you can find, that is when you're going to have to call an inspector. An inspector can come in and stop every single thing that you're doing and prevent you from opening until you have the right procedures in place. However, that being said, there was a very high influx of work refusals in March because of COVID. A lot of those work refusals were actually returned back as no danger. And that's because a lot of employers had the right controls in place. Like I said, there is an understanding to a certain extent with the government to say, you guys as employers are not always going to be able to eliminate hazards, but it is your responsibility to make it as safe as possible. So if you are making it as safe as possible, then that's, the most that the inspector is going to be able to ask for. So, you know, and just in how serious COVID is right now, just in Ontario alone, there is a COVID advisory committee that is made up of infection specialists and, amongst other parties to make sure that workplaces are taking the appropriate measures in place. There are some workplaces that are negligent on it, and there are some workplaces that will get shut down. But what's really important is that if you have the right controls in place, if you are communicating to them, if you are documenting the training that you're giving to them, whether it's a 20-minute toolbox session, you got to document that because if someone does refuse, you can go back and say, well, we did training on this day. This is all the things that we've covered. This is how safe I can make my workplace. And this is, the lengths that I have went to make this safe. If the inspector is satisfied with that, then essentially they're going to come back and go to your employee and say, well, you got to go back to work because there are proper controls in place. And then that employee needs to comply with the MOL or wherever you are, if it's WorkSafe BC inspector, they have to comply. They cannot turn to you after an inspector has said to the employee, I'm not coming back to work. That is essentially job abandonment in itself and would be grounds on, termination. They are absolutely allowed to appeal a decision from an inspector. However, during the time that they are appealing it, they have to do their normal duties. You do not need to assign them work. You can if you would like. However, what I would say is typically assigning them back to the original work that they were doing really upholds that, you have the backing of MOL or WorkSafe BC um, to really say, yes, the work is as safe as reasonably practical. So assigning alternate work is not necessarily something you as the employer need to, you know, stress out about. And it depends how long it takes for appeals to come back. Appeals sometimes I've seen, especially like I said in my previous life, appeals have taken 30 days. Appeals can take a couple days. Really just depends on the resources that the government has available to make those decisions. It really depends on the previous cases that you have with MOL. It also depends on, you know, information that's constantly emerging. And, it takes time for them to go through your previous audits and inspections. So those are things that you want to consider when and if you are dealing with a work refusal. So question comes in from Paulette. So Paulette, if we are doing toolbox training and it has to be after hours due to the nature of our workplace, yeah, I see that often. Are we obligated to pay our employees to attend the training? That is a good question, Paulette. I think it's more so of an HR related question. I would say that, like, look, the minimum amount of hours that we have to pay, that you're going to have to pay is 3 hours. Um, I don't know that, like, depending on the nature of the company that you do have, if you can tell them to review it online or have, an online session during the end of their shift or before their shift. It's up to I'm not obviously limited in understanding the business yet, but what I would say is I think it's best for you to for sure reach out to us and ask that specific question because if the employer really wants to be tough with you, then yes, they can demand to be paid for that time. It just depends on the culture I think that you have too. If you can allot that time elsewhere, typically I think a lot of employers right now are doing time off in lieu, or they're just paying them out for the hours. So let's say you've got to do a toolbox training session with them on, a Saturday or a Friday night or whatever. If they want to use that time elsewhere, that's something that you can plan for too. That's just the practical sense of what a lot of people are dealing with right now. But if you want to pay them, that's something that I would for sure reach out to us for. Like I said, I think the minimum is 3 hours. So essentially, you would have to pay them 3 hours for attending that session. But like I said, see what your options are. See how flexible your employees are with respects to time off in lieu, et cetera. It's a really difficult time. Depending, I know some employees, it goes to, all different ends, right? Some employees are really excited to come back to work and they're going to jump on that training right away because they want to get back in the business. And then you're always going to have, Paula, people that are going to cause issues, not even with COVID, but, other stuff. So um, you want to make sure obviously you have your ducks in a row. So like I said, look at the time off in lieu. You can definitely offer that, or you can offer the overtime, the 3 hours pay if you are doing it over hours. But not to, it's the last time I say it, but reach out to us with respect. This is more of an HR thing, but I know the HR team does see that a lot. So, I think that's the last question. I feel like time flew by with you guys today, and I'm very happy that you took the time to join us. Like I said, very exciting developments that we're going to navigate through. We will have a lot of webinars coming up. Just note that our webinar next week is canceled due to a holiday. However, following that, we will be picking them up again, especially with the topics of, preparing if we have a second wave, how we're going to navigate through that. Um, more training sessions that we have, specifics if we're talking about toolbox training and everything. So feel free to continue to join us. The session is going to be, with the exception of next week, every Wednesday. It will either be myself, which is the head of health and safety, Hope McManus, or it will be with our VP of legal and HR, which is Ryan Wozniak. So I think you can go wrong either way. In the meantime, it was lovely to speak to you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and please contact us if you have any other questions. We are here to help you. We are very excited to continue to work with you and be your God on the side. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Bye.